Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Radio Free Market. Our topic is guilty until proven innocent, the crime of civil asset forfeiture. Audrey was just telling us about the budget meeting she'd attended that got her interested in civil asset forfeiture within Missouri. So I want to know, how is asset forfeiture handled differently at the state level versus the federal level? Do many states have their own asset forfeiture laws on top of federal laws?
Absolutely. And every state law is different. I will say that Missouri is one of only 8 states that don't allow their law enforcement agencies to keep any of the civil asset forfeiture proceeds. So what that means is, as a law enforcement agency, when you're going to forfeit property, generally you can opt between the state law and the federal law, if the federal government will accept your forfeiture and accept taking it over. So if you know that you're not going to get any money back if you go through the state forfeiture, then you're probably going to go through the federal forfeiture. We've seen that already here in Missouri. As the recession has gone on, we've seen the amount of money that law enforcement agencies in Missouri get from the federal government just skyrocket, which, really, there's no corresponding increase in state forfeiture, so it's probably doesn't have anything to do with a huge increase in crime. It probably has more to do with budgets. So different states have different policies. The other thing that I think is important to mention, if I can remember the exact, the other thing important to mention is not only do most states allow their law enforcement agencies to keep some of the funds, a majority, 27, allow law enforcement agencies to keep all of the funds. So then what you really have is you have an incentive at both the federal level and the state level to forfeit away, because it's going to help your bottom line.
I see. So is Missouri doing a lot better than its neighbors in terms of how much property they seize, or are they still seizing about the same amount? They just do it in a creative way?
It's the second. They do it in a creative way. Actually, we compared the amount of money Missouri gets per resident through federal forfeiture to the surrounding states, and Missouri gets more than any surrounding state with the exception of Nebraska. Nebraska is basically the same amount. It's just a difference of a dime or two per resident. I think Missouri gets about $3 per capita every year from federal forfeiture, which, if you think about it, we have 6 million people, so we're getting a lot from federal forfeiture. And meanwhile, our state forfeiture numbers have kind of remained roughly constant. So we're increasing it through we're increasing our federal forfeitures, again, presumably because of budgetary pressure.
Now, it's also important to mention that, at the state level, all the money is supposed to, in Missouri, if you go through state-level forfeiture, all the money is supposed to go into a fund for school construction. And so, a lot of people view this as taking money away from schools. I'm not sure if that's the best prism to view it through, but nonetheless, it's at least a place where, if it was going there, the law enforcement agency wouldn't have the incentive to go out and seek out people's property and take it from them on little to no evidence.
Right, and I read from y'all that the school building revolving fund gets all the assets since a 1990 Missouri Supreme Court ruling. So were Missouri law enforcement agencies able to practice asset forfeiture pretty much however they pleased before the 1990 ruling?
Well, before the 1990 ruling, it seemed like there were these two portions of state law that were conflicting. It seemed like under state law you could choose whether you wanted the law enforcement agency to keep the proceeds or if you wanted it to go to the school building revolving fund. So then the issue went to the Supreme Court because the school districts really wanted the money, and the Supreme Court said, you know what, it needs to go to the schools. It's not supposed to be going to the law enforcement agencies. And what was interesting is after that ruling, the heads of law enforcement agencies, chiefs of police were saying very publicly, this means we're going to go the federal route.
So also, how did the laws in Missouri change in 1993?
Oh, yeah. So in 1993, the Missouri enacted forfeiture reform laws to forbid a forfeiture occurring unless a corresponding felony charge had been filed. prior to that, there had been a series of articles in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch illustrating that forfeiture money was being taken when there really was no criminal charge. It was just kind of, well, we really want this property, and it looks like it could have been part of the commission of a crime, so we're going to take it. Now, again, under Missouri law, the statute says that the property cannot be forfeited unless the individual, the owner, has been charged subsequently with a Class C felony or greater. Now, again, as we discussed previously, the word subsequently, at least to you and me, seems like, well, you better file that criminal charge pretty quickly thereafter. But in practice, a lot of law enforcement agencies seem to be very confused as to the meaning of subsequently. I think we've seen counties where that can mean 100 days or more. I think that's certainly an area for improvement.
Also, there are some cases where, although there's been a criminal charge, a felony-level criminal charge filed against somebody, Missouri law requires that if the forfeiture is to actually stand, there has to be a conviction as well. It can't just be charged. But we have seen cases where, a charge starts out as they charge a person with a felony-level charge, but then it's either plea bargained down or the person's found not guilty. Yet the civil forfeiture case goes forward, and in one instance, a guy had money taken from him, and he went to court over it and got the money back, but he had to pay a lawyer and pay all these fees in order to do that. When that forfeiture, because the criminal charge was plea bargained, the forfeiture never should have happened in the first place. So the government in that case was obviously violating the law, but even the guy's attorney wasn't aware of it.
I see. So, meanwhile, just as Missouri is having all these issues with asset forfeiture, there's a drive for reform in D.C. as well. So what exactly led to CAFRA? Was there a federal, outrageous kind of federal forfeiture that led to CAFRA in 2000?
Well, there was I don't know that there was one big event that sort of crystallized the opposition to it, but there were. It was an issue that a lot of conservative Republicans like Henry Hyde and Bob Barr, who were in Congress at the time, as well as some Democrats, could work together on, because it both illustrated the excesses of the drug war and the need for greater property rights. So there was some bipartisanship in crafting the legislation. And so in 2000, Henry Hyde was the one who really spearheaded it. And essentially, what it did is it actually raised the standard of evidence that the government had to meet in civil forfeiture cases to the preponderance of evidence. Before that, it wasn't even that. It was basically that there was reasonable suspicion and they could take it, and you would have to sue and prove that you didn't do it. You'd have to prove a negative, essentially, in order to get your property back. And also, it provided for an innocent owner defense, which is, say there's an old grandmother and her grandson lives in her house, and unbeknownst to her, her grandson is selling marijuana out of the house. Well, the police could come in and seize the house because it was used in a crime. Well, under Henry Hyde's reforms in CAFRA, you could not seize the house. The house would still be hers because she was unaware of it. She's innocent, so the property can't be seized. And it also provided for a public defender for poor property owners, especially in cases where their homes are being seized. So these were some good improvements, but there were some things that it did not improve. Mainly that it left equitable sharing in place, so it's still, the incentive to go out and seek out forfeitures is still there, and so that's the biggest thing that's driving these numbers. And even though these forfeiture changes happened, the equitable sharing was still driving a large increase in federal forfeiture. So you have forfeitures going from a few $100 million a year up to about $1.5 billion a year by 2008. And the other thing that it did not do anything about was the forfeiture waivers, the sort of thing you saw in Tenaha, Texas, where the police say, we're going to take your property unless you sign over the right to your property to us. That way we won't charge you with any sort of criminal wrongdoing. And so that is still legal under CAFRA, and that's one of the things that really needs to be changed.
Right. So just basically extortion, in other words.
In many cases, yes.
Yeah. So, like you said, it's gone from $338 million in 1996, I'm reading your notes, to $1.3 billion in 2008. And then y'all said it's gone up since then with this recession. I mean, I'm not surprised by that at all, with government budgets tightening across the country. It's sort of enforcement agencies are going into their revenue-seeking mode. So around here you see a lot more police on the streets writing tickets. So y'all are tracking, where's your focus nowadays in Missouri in terms of tracking this? What are you looking into going forward with this topic, research topic?
Well, I do think it's really important to call attention to the fact that in Missouri and probably everywhere else, federal forfeitures are increasing. In Missouri, it's gone from a little more than 10 million to almost 20 million between 2008 and 2009, which is incredible. Basically, it's nearly doubled. I also think it's important to continue to call attention, and though there might not be an easy answer, to the fact that these federal laws and different state laws are conflicting, and that basically the federal law allows government agencies to override a lot of state laws, to bypass them. I think that's really important, that there are these states that are trying to provide greater property rights and security to state residents, and yet law enforcement agencies can say, you know what, we don't like that law, we're just going to take this to the federal level.
Also, I think moving forward, we would, it's not entirely positive that we'll be able to do more on this subject, but if we are able to, I think some of the things we would like to look into is the extent of administrative or abandonment forfeiture. So to what extent are police agencies in Missouri using these forfeiture waivers to take people's property, and also, getting the auditor to keep better records, forcing the counties to keep better records of all the ways they do forfeiture, and reporting that to the auditor. So at least, whether it be us or some other interested organization or individual in the public can go out and get this information and report on what the police are doing, because it's not, if it's not all kept, if all that information is not kept, we really don't know. And that's one of the most troubling things about it, is that there's so much that we don't know. And we already see how much what we do know about is abused. And that's where the police have some incentive not to be, too crazy with it, because they know people might find out about it. So how much worse might it be in cases where they know that they're never going to be subject to, public attention? Right.
So what are the counties that are doing it correctly?
Well, I would say one of the standout counties is Boone County, which actually is the county encompassing Columbia, Missouri, which is in the center of the state and also has the campus of the University of Missouri. I don't know if that's a coincidence or not, but Boone County does a very good job. Boone County is the county that interpreted the Missouri state statute that says a criminal charge must be filed subsequently to the seizure of property extremely strictly, to the point in some cases of actually filing the criminal charge first. I believe the average delay between a seizure and the filing of a criminal charge in Boone County is 4 days or less. I mean, it's just incredible there. They do a really great job. Now, by contrast, we have counties like Greene County, which also have a lot of people, but certainly don't seem that concerned about getting their criminal charges in place in any sort of timely manner. And as well as Cole County, which actually is just south of Boone County. So really, in Missouri, just being stopped by a police officer on one side or the other of a county line can really make all the difference in the world in terms of how you're treated and how your property rights are respected.
Mm-hmm. So is this where you drew your ideas for better methods of reform in Missouri? from, comparing different counties and how they interpret the rules differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Though, again, I would say across the board, I mean, a lot of these counties are doing federal forfeiture, and a lot of them do it pretty frequently. I think 4 counties in Missouri all forfeited more than $1 million in 2009 alone, using the federal forfeiture laws. So that still is kind of an indication that this is a problem across the state of Missouri. There are some counties that play by the rules in many cases, but overall there are some concerns that we have throughout the state.
I'd say the big variation between counties is the length of time that the forfeitures are held without any criminal charges. Audrey was talking about Boone County being very good on that with only a few days. Well, Franklin County, which is sort of on the exurbs of St. Louis, it's a very outer county, their average delay between when they file a criminal charge and when they file the civil charge against the property is 342 days. So that's almost a year, and that's a huge gap from the 4.2 days that you're looking at in Boone County. But the thing is that, like Audrey said, there's problems in every one of these counties because a lot of these counties are still pursuing forfeiture in cases where there is no criminal charge through the federal government, and people are forfeiting property without ever being convicted of a crime, and that's something that should probably stop.
And can we just talk really briefly about records maintenance? I mean, we're in the year 2011, we're in the 21st century, well into it, and we're still seeing policing agencies, which we know have the technology to do better, submitting their records of their forfeitures, the report that they have to submit to the state that says, this is how much we forfeited and this is who we forfeited it from. They're submitting that.
Probably on a napkin, even on a napkin with
it's just handwritten, and that's incredible to me because I can tell you right now, I'm sure that they do have it in a spreadsheet somewhere. Like, what is the reason that we are handwriting in this information, other than it makes it really hard for people like John and me to put together a report because we have to go and type it all in, and things like that can really serve as a barrier to any other watchdog groups.
Right. So. What are your ideas? We're about to head into a break, but we'll go further into this in the next segment. But what are your ideas for better methods of reform in Missouri?
Well, I think one of the key things is that localities need to offset the amount of money that their policing agencies get from federal asset forfeiture, and just deny them that amount of money in their budget. Say, if you want to pursue federal forfeiture, that's fine, but we're not going to allow you to profit from it. So if you get $1 million in federal forfeiture money, we're going to take $1 million out of your budget next year. And that, I think that's politically possible as well because it appeals to all these city councils that would like to save money.
All right, well, we're going to head into our next closing segment here in just a second. We'll come back. Welcome back to our last segment of Guilty Until Proven Innocent, the Crime of Civil Asset Forfeiture with John Payne and Audrey Spalding of the Show Me Institute. So y'all were just talking about a method of reform that y'all would put in place in Missouri specifically, that localities should offset the money gained from federal forfeiture, dollar for dollar. Do you have any other ones?
Well, I think the other thing that, we've been talking about is the fact that sometimes property is seized and then it takes, it can take up to a year or more for you to ultimately end up with a criminal charge. Now, we think that needs to be addressed. It could be addressed by compensating someone whose property has been held for more than a year, just, to discourage law enforcement agencies from that practice. Or it could also be requiring law enforcement agencies to explain in writing why they still haven't produced a criminal charge against you, even though they've been holding your property for a bunch of months. And that would kind of open the door perhaps to some litigation to say, well, you need to give this back to me, or just to produce it to a judge and say, well, look, clearly the law isn't being followed in this case. I need my property back.
Consider it sort of like a writ of habeas corpus for your property. Instead of produce the body, a writ of habeas corpus requires that if you're going to hold someone in jail, you have to bring charges against that person and give them a trial. Well, in this case, if you're going to hold this property, then you need to bring charges against this person, or, you need to give us an explanation for why the seizure is, acceptable within the law. So it would be sort of like that, except just in the case of property.
Right. I just want to read a quote that I found off the Federal Department of Justice's Asset Forfeiture Program website, and they say that their asset forfeiture program encompasses the seizure and forfeiture of assets that represent the proceeds of or where they employ asset forfeiture powers in a manner that enhances public safety and security. This is accomplished by removing the proceeds of crime and other assets relied upon by criminals and their associates to perpetuate their crime activity against our society. So would y'all say that this is the most common way that you see asset forfeiture used, or are the incentives just entirely all wrong and it goes into the coffers of local government?
Well, I'll say that, there are plenty of cases that I see where the person is convicted of a crime and is, does not seem like a good guy. I'm not going to say that everyone who has civil asset forfeiture used against them is a victim. But I do see plenty of cases where either no charges are ever filed or the person is found not guilty. And in the American criminal justice system, at least ideally, we're not supposed to punish people unless they're found guilty of a crime. And so I would say that in those cases, we're punishing people without ever seeking a conviction against them, and that's fundamentally unjust. And also, at another level, we're just able to inconvenience a lot of people who, they aren't able to get their property back because it's taken from them, and it's maybe a couple $100. Well, you could go out and get a lawyer and fight it, but that's probably going to cost you more than it's worth. And so in those cases, who knows if there was ever a crime committed, but the police are more interested in the money, and so it seems like it's perverting the incentives of law enforcement.
And I think, the other thing, and I'm sure you could address this or have addressed this in many other radio programs, but, so the language used on the DEA's website, is that we need these laws to deprive drug criminals of their property and their resources, and that's why we do it. We had a case in Missouri, Camp Zoe, where there were people using drugs on the property, but they were not the owner. And the law enforcement agencies knew about this, and they didn't arrest the people as they were actually doing this currently criminal behavior, but they waited for a while so that they could seize the property. So if the ostensible purpose is to crack down on drug crime, then that certainly wasn't what was going on there. It was more, well, this looks like some good property, we want it.
Mm-hmm. Let me cut y'all off there, and I want to thank y'all so much for being on the show with us today. I really appreciate your time. This is Zoe Russell signing off with Radio Free Market. Please visit us on the web where you can find this and all of our shows for free. Wherever you are, please stand up for freedom. Thank you for listening.